then all the legislators who want private mail about people's personal lives should be addressed to a different mail.
Well, that's a good point. And you know, I have two. I didn't bring my other. I've got my. This is my iPhone. It's my personal iPhone. I've got a legislative issued smartphone, an Android phone out in the car. When people, and I get stuff on both of them. Most stuff that I have when people write me about bills, my constituents or other legislators, that goes to that phone. I get a lot of stuff on this phone, and most legislators do. And so it's when the grandma request is designed to allow you to get at all that stuff, which is a good thing. I mean, I had people up there say, "Hey, Mike Noel, who is another guy, you all know Mike from Canab, the anti-environmentalist. Mike's actually a smart guy, and he's a funny guy. He can be a good guy at times. He makes me crazy on some things, but I heard him talking at the rally on Thursday night to some people. He was walking through the crowd. He loves confrontation. And he was walking through the crowd, and people were sort of catcalling and said, "Hey, we want your information." And he said, "Hey, this is my own phone." And I thought, Mike, dude, I get stuff on this phone all the time that's state-related. And I have most of my stuff. I also get literally communications from my wife about what our kids are doing later in the day, and she needs a car, things like that. Here's the way that you get around private information issues. Mike was saying to everyone, "Hey, this is my private phone, you're not entitled to it." I thought, no. They are entitled to it if it has to any degree communications that deal with the state. That's accurate. I think that you ought to be entitled to it in this sense. If somebody says to me, "I want all the communications King had with anybody about anything related to this state issue," and what would happen is the Legislative Research and General Counsel folks would come to me and say, "Brian, we need access to that stuff." And I'd say, "Okay." And they would look through it. There's already in GRAMA a provision that doesn't allow for the disclosure of personal information. If I'm talking to my wife about what I need to pick up at the grocery store on the way home, or, you know, apologizing because I've offended her that morning and I'm trying to make up, very personal stuff, you know, that's not going to be disclosed. We already have a provision in GRAMA that says it's not going to be disclosed, and the folks at the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel will look through all that information and pull out the personal information as it is. So this idea that you hear from legislators about, well, we had to revise it because we were worried about personal information being disclosed, that is a flat-out, nonsensical diversion. We already have provisions in place to prevent that from happening. You guys don't want that. You don't care about that. You're not entitled to it. And we already have perfectly good protections for how that's not going to get disclosed. So that, if you hear that argument, you'll know that somebody's desperate.
Thank you.
Because it's a stupid argument. It's a stupid argument. Other questions about GRAMA?
Are you going to have to put language in there so whatever the next thing is, you don't have to keep coming back to it, and so whatever, I mean, 20 years ago when you adopted this, we didn't know Twitter, Facebook, any of these things.
Well, yeah, I mean, and right now, the way the law is written, it doesn't matter what the method of communication is. What matters is, what's the substance of the communication? And that's what should matter. It doesn't matter how I communicate here. If we had a method, I mean, you know, we've got this camera rolling, right? Conceivably, you could have a GRAMA request for communications that King had with the Weber County Democrats on March 12, 2011, 2 years down the road for some reason or another. We wouldn't have ever had, I guess we could have 20 years ago, had an 8mm camera taking this, but you know, this has become very common. And we shouldn't be saying, if it's recorded in such and such a way, some new technology, it's not subject to production. What we should be saying is, we have to look at the substance of the communication. Is the communication about something to do with state government or not? If it is, it's subject to being produced upon request. That's the way the law is right now. And they want to change that in a way that I find very problematic. Yeah?
Is there any real probability that they're going to productively change or get rid of that bill?
Here's what the Republicans say. The Republicans say that they've been trying to work in a common sense, reasonable fashion with the media for years to revise GRAMA. And they say that the media is completely intransigent. The media won't give an inch. The media, the legislature goes, and by legislature I mean the Republicans, because Democrats aren't involved in these communications. Democrats pretty much love grandma the way it is. The Republicans say to the media, look, we've got A, B, C, and D concerns. They're reasonable concerns about how grandma needs to be revised, and they claim that the media says, yeah, we can see your point, but we're not doing anything to change grandma. So the argument from the Republicans is we had to jam this through with very little notice and very little time for the media or for the citizens of the state of Utah to weigh in, because the media just won't give an inch. Now, obviously, the media doesn't feel that way, but it is true to say that the media thinks that grandma, as it's currently written, is just great, and they don't want to see it changed. So your question is a good one, and I think you will see some changes in the current bill that just passed. How significant will they be? I don't know. I hope that they're significant. I hope we reach this issue about every communication will have to, regardless of how it's communicated, will have to be reviewed based on its substance, as opposed to whether it's a Twitter account, or whether it's a text, or whether it's a conventional written letter, or whether it's a text, or an email, things like that. So, I don't know. I think that the chances of there being significant changes in the statute in a way that we want to see are increased significantly based on how much people talk about it. The media is going to keep the issue alive. People need to keep the issue alive. We need to have people writing their legislators, and we need to have people writing the governor saying, this is a terrible statute. So I hope we'll do that. Steve?
You know, one thing that was interesting, maybe not about grandma, but the way that how demonstrative this is of how the legislature works. I saw the list of who voted for and against this, and in both houses, Chris Butters was the only Republican to vote against it.
That's true.
Everybody else, straight as an arrow, lined up.
Well, and you had a couple of Democrats vote for it in the House.
I noticed that. I noticed that.
That was annoying to me. But
to not
Tell us who that was.
but to not have in the House as many Republicans as there are, not have a single Republican dissent. That's troubling.
Let me address that, Steve. There were two people in the House that I know. There may have been more. Two Democrats who voted for it. Neil Hendrickson and Sue Duckworth. Democrats from the west side of Salt Lake voted for it. I think they're second. I think they're thinking twice about that now. Let me tell you some conversations I had with some of my Republican colleagues in the House, and I won't name them out of respect for them, but a number of them came to me privately and said, like last Monday, when they'd gone through the weekend and really we'd caught a lot of flack. I'm telling you, sometimes you make votes and you don't know whether you're doing the right thing, and you make votes sometimes and people come back who you really want to support and they say, did you know that we were against that position you took? And I said, no. Sometimes later I make a vote, and sometimes you make a vote and you know that labor has come out against the bill and you vote for it for one reason or another anyway, and you just say no. But I've been ignorant sometimes about stuff that I wasn't aware of and voted on something, and then people came to me and said, you know, we were really strongly against that bill. And I said, no, I didn't know that. You got to do a better job of communicating with me. But those are votes that are that go down hard, and when you make a vote that occasionally you make a vote either out of inadvertence or you just are exercising poor judgment or you're uninformed or something, and when you get more information, you come back later and you go, I screwed that up. This was one of these things that a lot of Republicans came to me on Monday. 2 or 3 Republicans that I really think are good people and I have respect for. I think they have some integrity. I don't agree with them, but they have integrity. And they came to me and said, this was a mistake. We made a mistake. The Republican leadership in the House caucus said, we're all voting for this thing. This is a very important bill. You have to vote for this thing. We want you to vote for this thing. And they voted for it, and they immediately, by Monday, they'd come back and said, we messed that up. And that was one of the reasons that the legislative leaders came into Governor Herbert and said, okay, we'll put off the implementation date. They didn't have to do that based on the vote. The vote in both chambers would have overridden any veto from the governor if those votes had stayed in place. But the governor went to several Republican legislators and said, do you really want to stick by that vote? And they said, no, we don't want to stick by that vote. we're going to back off that vote, and if you push us, we're going to vote no on this bill if it comes back before us, and we're not going to allow for an override of the veto. That's why Republican leadership agreed to a later implementation date, is that they knew that they weren't going to have the votes there to override the governor's veto if he did choose to veto it. So they, you know, some of the Republicans recognize that it's a bad bill. Interesting. Interesting stuff. Any other questions about grandma? I don't want to take too much of your time. There are a couple of other issues.
Why didn't the governor just veto it then?
Well, a lot of people said he chickened out, you know.
That's what I see.
He doesn't want another $13 million being found.
Well, here's why I think. The governor has to maintain a good working relationship with legislative leaders. And legislative leaders really want this bill to go through. For various reasons. Some of them just hate the media. Some of them just want to be able to do their work without having anybody look over their shoulder. But it's going to set up a confrontation with the legislative leadership if the governor vetoes that bill, and I think he knew that. I actually wrote the governor's attorney, his general counsel, over the last weekend, and said, you got to urge the governor to veto this thing. This is a bad bill. His general counsel is a friend of mine and is a relatively straight shooter, right-thinking guy. I wrote to him and said, I don't write to you very often, John, about these issues, but this is one issue that I have such heartburn about. I think you ought to advise the governor to veto this. And so this was the governor's way of splitting the difference. And he could have vetoed it and gotten away with it, but it would have been a pretty ugly scene, and it would have created problems for his ability to work with legislative leadership in the future. There's always some tension there. There's less tension between the governor's office and the legislature when they're members of the same party, but even then you can have tension. I mean, Governor Huntsman really irritated some members of Republican leadership in the legislature by some of his positions that he took. And I myself, I think he's the best Democratic governor we've had since Scott Mathis. But Herbert, I think, is trying to, it's not taking bags of cash under the table or being offered bribes. It's a much more insidious thing. It's a much more subtle thing, but it's very real. And we do have people who have self-interest and just naked financial gain coming to us and saying, here's an idea for a bill, this is a great idea, or do this and do that, and they cloak it, of course, in ways that make it look as if it's in the best interest of the citizens of the state. But they have a motive that benefit themselves or their people who hire them. There's no question about it. That happens all the time. And there's pressure brought to bear. So I agree entirely with what you're saying, especially, as I said earlier, when you're talking about a state that's so one-sided in its political control, the media becomes even more critical. And so I'll work hard. I think all the Democrats, except there are a couple that don't like the media, but most Democrats, and I know Democratic leadership, feel strongly about doing all we can do to fix that statute, to neuter it. And in the year of the feral cat, neutering is what we want to do.
What happened to Otis Bill?
Otis Bill died in the Senate.
Oh, right.
We were so tired of Otis Bill on the feral cat.